Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Also, I did not understand what you told about me, but I understood the professor, so it's I'm an academic. I do research about vocational training and a comparative perspective, so I was very happy when Carl contacted me, Carl Skar, to be a keynote speaker on this conference, and I also thank his team for the whole assistance and preparation of my talk. So I was happy because the cooperation between schools and firms is a very, very important political topic and also practical topic for those engaged in vocational training, and we should all care about this topic. As you may know, I made some comparative research on vocational training in a very general, more national level, on training policies in different countries, mostly in countries with a dual training system, and mostly on the national level. I also made research about the role of employers, trade unions, and collective bargaining in the system, and so I thought I was really well prepared for this topic, and this was also a reason why I was so happy for this invitation. However, in the preparation of this talk, the thing that I thought will be an easygoing turned out much more complicated and challenging, because the political and practical interest in firm-school cooperation is much greater than those of academics, I have to say, than those of comparative politics, for example. So we know a lot of things about vocational training in general, but we do not know much about the decentralized cooperation, the cooperation on the local level or on the sectoral level. So the literature is a little bit patchy on this topic, but nevertheless, as I'm an academic, I found some robust findings, and I have two key messages for this of my talk, which you should take home today. The first is that types of school employers cooperation in initial vocational training, IVT, are country-specific and affected by the general patterns of firm-state cooperation in vocational training. And for that reason, I will start my talk with a short introduction, a short overview of how vocational training is organized in different countries, and we have to differentiate between collective systems and other systems where employers and trade unions are not so much incorporated in vocational training. Secondly, then, the second take-home message is that when we study cooperation between schools and firms, we should know that this cooperation does not develop by default. We need coordinated employers, and we need public policies supporting such cooperation. We need coordinated employers. That means that we need employers associations, employers acting on the meso level and not only on the firm level. And that also means that we need employers associations which a little bit counterbalance the interest of large and small and medium-sized firms, which are quite differently sometimes and very often. So this is a roadmap of my talk. I start a little bit with introducing into varieties of skill formation. I use this term the same like vocational training in this talk. And then I focus on varieties of cooperation between schools and firms in collective training systems. I will tell you in a minute what collective skill formation systems are, and then I will come to some varieties in firm-school cooperation and collective systems, and then I hope we'll find a short conclusion. So my first point, you all know, and it's also widely acknowledged, that human capital is a quite desirable good because it contributes to economic performance as well as social integration in modern societies. In recent years, also public policies and the state or the European Union acknowledge this decisive role with the turn to the knowledge-based society or economy. But if human capital is such a desirable good, why is it so hard to create? And why do countries differ so much in how they attempt to produce it? Maybe the Rembrandt's trap has also discussed these questions. My colleague Marius Busemeyer and me, his professor at the University of Constance, some years ago, we made a bigger research project about varieties of skill formation in different countries. We analyzed why countries differ, and we especially traced the development of collective skill formation systems. That means skill formation systems where employers and the state are strongly involved in the provision, financing, regulating, and monitoring of vocational training. We argue that the main characteristic of collective skill formation systems is that they are collectively organized. And in particular, this means that 4 features are important for collective skill formation systems. The first feature is that firms are strongly involved in financing and administering training, and particular workplace training, workplace-based training. Secondly, and that makes them collective, we need intermediary associations which are strongly involved in the administration and reform of these systems. Thirdly, collective skill formation systems, they provide portable, certified, and standardized skills. And fourthly, training takes place not only in schools and not only in firms, but usually in the form of dual apprenticeship systems. So you all know there are different varieties of alternating training systems, dual training systems, and some countries call them dual, also they are not really dual. What I mean with dual training systems is really that every week the apprentice visits school and also works in the firm in order to acquire the work-based experience. So what do I mean with firm involvement and state involvement? That's obviously a very important factor characterizing these systems. And why is it important that firms as well as the state is involved in vocational training? It's important that firms are involved because this pertains the willingness of firms to invest in skill formation. And the particular feature of collective skill formation systems is that these systems not only provide firm-specific skills, but also industry-specific skills. That means skills that are transferable to other firms, and that makes them collective. And the degree of public commitment is important because it's the state who has money, who can support the administering of training, who can provide vocational schools, who could organize the standardization and monitoring processes and the examination process, and so forth. So if we take these 2 dimensions, here's the English one, firm involvement and state involvement, we end up with a 2x2 matrix. And this captures nicely the variety of training systems in, let us say, advanced economies, some of the OECD countries. We find there are 4 types of training systems. The first one is the liberal training system. Here you see public commitment in vocational training is low, and firm involvement is also low. These liberal systems dominate in countries like the United States or the United Kingdom. Secondly, we have statist skill formation systems where public commitment in vocational training is high, but firm involvement is much lower than, for example, in the collective skill formation system. Countries representing these types are some of the Scandinavian countries and also France. All I know about Norway is that it could be possible that it could move to the collective skill formation system, but some proactive activities would be necessary on the side of employers as well as on the side of the state, because we have some role models like the Netherlands or Denmark who managed to shift more to the collective skill formation system because they implemented really nationwide dual apprenticeship system. So then the third type is the segmentalist skill formation system. Here's one cell reserved for Japan. Japan is a country where firms cooperate in skill formation, but the state is not so much involved. And then we have the collective skill formation system, which I just characterized a few seconds ago. So we have here also a figure. This is also taken out of the volume, which I published together with Marius Busemeyer. And here you see on the y-axis the public involvement in vocational training, and on the x-axis the firm involvement in vocational training. And let us look where Norway is. Norway is on the way to the upper side of the graph, on the way to Austria, Germany, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. Here you see this uses OECD data, which has its limits, I have to say. Here you see in Norway, firm involvement is much higher in vocational training as, for example, in France or Finland or in Ireland, Italy, Spain, Sweden, and so on and so forth. So now, let us now move to the topic between cooperation between schools and firms. I here focus on the collective skill formation systems because it should be clear that there's much more firm-school cooperation in collective systems than in the liberal system, the segmentalist system, or the state system, because in these other three types, we lack one important actor very much. So why is cooperation important between schools and firms? Here I listed several arguments why we should care about cooperation. Cooperation can help to match the supply and demand of training places. It could increase the training quality. It could increase, and that's very important, the incentives of small and medium-sized firms to participate in vocational training. Cooperation is good to increase the quality of curriculars and ordinances. It extends local and regional networks in vocational training. It's also important because it builds bridge to other segments of the education system, the school system, as well as the higher education system. And of course, it may help to prevent dropouts, and it could contribute to the inclusion of disadvantaged youth. So here we see cooperation is a good thing, but why is it so difficult, and why does cooperation not always happen? Even in collective skill formation systems, we have different degrees of cooperation between schools and firms. Cooperation is particularly difficult when we do not have any tradition of firm involvement or of public commitment in vocational training, so when we have a non-collective training system. But when we have a collective training system, it's also difficult because we have different needs of large and small and medium-sized firms, and because, and that's the most important factor, we have different rationalities and logic of actions in schools and firms. Schools are mostly state-run, so here we have the political logic. We may have political cleavages, we may have fiscal cleavages, in particular in federal countries like Germany or Switzerland or Austria. And firms are profit seekers, and there may be a collective action problem because cooperation is beneficial for individual firms, even when they do not contribute to this cooperation. So there could be emerging a free rider problem. So when we now study cooperation cross-nationally, and I will go into details then in the workshop in the afternoon, we first have to know or to define what does cooperation mean. Cooperation moves beyond information. Cooperation means a kind of action or process of working together to the same end. That's taken out of the Oxford Dictionary, and it really describes the situation very well. But in order to know how much cooperation is possible and the factors of cooperation, we have to define which areas of cooperation are important and on which level cooperation should take place. When we talk about firm-school cooperation, what we all know from comparative research is that it's decisive to organize cooperation on the learning process and as well in the dimension of governance. Learning process means that there should be a cooperation in curricular settings and how learning experiences are organized in the classroom and in the firms, and how one could combine these learning experiences. But there's another dimension, that is the dimension of governance. And here we have to analyze and to see how school and firms cooperate in regulation and financing and administering of training. Important is also, before I come to my last slide, important is also that we be aware that there are different levels of cooperation. There's, on the one hand, the micro level of cooperation, where learning and teaching arrangements, how learning and teaching arrangements are organized in individual schools or firms. An example is how do school teachers, for example, contact individual firms and trainers in firms. And here we know that this is much more important for medium-sized firms, small and medium-sized firms, than for large firms, because large firms do that by their own. We know that from the Austrian experience, for example. But there could be also a meso level, and here is the cooperation between collective actors important. So there should be cooperation between employers' associations, and they should be and schools as an institutions. Employers' associations should be cooperated in the management of school boards, as well as school representatives should be represented in examination committees of firms, for example. And the macro level is the policy level. So here employers and school representatives should be involved in policy making on rules in steering cooperation. So here you see the second main message. So we have different collective training systems, and we expect more cooperation in collective skill formation systems. In my talk in the afternoon and the workshop, I will figure out some evidences how a cooperation between schools and firms is organized in countries like Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Denmark, and the Netherlands. And the main findings is here that these countries differ because cooperation between firms and schools vary very, very much. It seems to me, and also to other researchers, that Denmark seems to be a good performer in governance cooperation, and that has something to do with the fact that employers are traditionally very much involved in school management, and even employers were one of the key actors founding schools, historically vocational training schools. We find, astonishingly and by surprise, more cooperation in Austria and Switzerland than in Germany. And in the Netherlands, cooperation is still a little bit difficult. So, conclusions. My first conclusion is that employer coordination in IVT is a sufficient condition for cooperation between schools and firms. So you should not approach only individual employers, but employers' associations should be engaged in organizing this cooperation. Collective systems also differ with regard to school-firm cooperation, and because we here find also varieties, and the variety also depend very much from the public commitment and the role of the state in vocational training. And that's also the reason why cooperation, it is important, but it does not come by default, and we need public policies and we need employers' associations which proactively initiate and organize this kind of cooperation between schools and firms. So thank you very much for your attention, and yeah. Was exactly
perfect. So thank you very much, Christine. I think this is very useful information for us, and I think this further development of the tripartite cooperation in Norway is a very important topic for us to discuss further to improve the collaboration between schools and enterprises. So thank you very much. And as you said, you will have a workshop later today. So for those of you that want to hear more about this topic, you're very much welcome. Yep. So we have a little gift made by students from Årstad Upper Secondary School. It's made of a poster made by the county when they passed like 500,000 inhabitants. So I think this is a really, really good bag.
Yeah, thank you. I will memorize it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.